What happens when a 35-year-old African president walks into a room full of the world's most powerful leaders and refuses to play their game? Everyone expected him to come asking for favors, desperate, grateful, predictable. But instead, he showed up with something bold, a plan that didn't just challenge the status quo, it had the potential to transform an entire continent. This story doesn't start in a village or a battlefield. It starts in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, inside a palace of power, where billionaires casually sip espresso while shaping the future of nations, where polished marble floors reflect more than light. They reflect legacy, ambition, and dominance. And yet, on this particular day, one man's quiet defiance would shake the room. This isn't just a tale of politics or economics. It's about pride, identity, the kind of respect that isn't given, it's earned. So, what happens when someone decides not to follow the script, when they flip it entirely? By the end of this story, you'll understand how one unexpected moment, just a conversation really, sent shockwaves through 3 continents. How it turned a so-called poor nation into a respected player, not a passive recipient of global charity, but a partner with power and purpose. It was March 15th. The King Abdulaziz Conference Center gleamed like something out of a dream. The floors were so spotless, they reflected every step. The Riyadh skyline outside was a display of modern-day empire, steel and glass stretching toward the sky, symbols of oil-fueled ambition. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. It wasn't just another investment summit, it was the summit, the place where deals worth billions was sealed with a handshake, where a nod from the right person could send markets soaring or crashing, where you didn't just attend, you performed. The guest list was a roll call of global muscle, tech titans from Silicon Valley, oil barons from Texas, German industrialists, and heads of state with nuclear codes and secret agendas. And into that high-stakes theater walked a young African president, calm, focused, and completely unwilling to play by their rules. At exactly 9 a.m., Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stepped into the grand hall, and the entire room shifted. He didn't need to say a word. At 38, he was already a force of nature, the man behind Saudi Arabia's jaw-dropping transformation. Skyscrapers rising in the desert, a trillion-dollar vision, called NEOM, and a sweeping plan, Vision 2030, that wasn't just changing his country, but rewriting the future of the Middle East. This wasn't just another summit. Today, the prince would choose which of the world's biggest players would get access to Saudi Arabia's massive $2 trillion public investment fund. In short, he would decide who got to sit at the table. By sunrise, the ultra-elite had begun to arrive. Private jets parked, wing to wing at King Khalid International Airport, turning the runway into a billionaire parking lot. Power suits, handshakes, rehearsed smiles, each delegate carrying glossy decks, grand promises, and pitches polished to perfection. They came to talk about the future, renewable energy, AI, space tech, smart cities. This was where tomorrow was being sold, and everyone wanted a piece. Some faces were expected. The president of Singapore came to talk semiconductors. Brazil's foreign minister had a pitch for agricultural tech. Even Estonia's prime minister showed up, offering cutting-edge digital governance. But buried low on the agenda, almost like a scheduling error, was a name that drew raised eyebrows and puzzled looks. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Whispers spread like wildfire. Burkina what? A landlocked country in West Africa that barely showed up on most people's radar. A nation whose total GDP was less than what some of these attendees spent on private islands or art auctions. Infrastructure, crumbling, global influence, practically non-existent. So why was he here? What could the leader of a so-called poor country possibly bring to a room full of trillion-dollar dreamers and decision-makers? No one knew it yet, but by the end of the day, They wouldn't be laughing, they'd be listening. Behind him, limited resources, almost no international clout. Ahead of him, a room full of titans, and everywhere around him, doubt. Why is he even here? One of the German delegates muttered under his breath. Burkina Faso? What could a tiny, landlocked West African country possibly offer Saudi Arabia? It seemed laughable. But that question, the one whispered in passing, was about to flip the entire room, because the answer would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, partnership, and who really gets to shape the future. The morning moved along, as expected. One polished pitch after another. Sleek slides, jaw-dropping stats, billion-dollar projections. Every presenter looked the part. Tailored suits, glossy smiles, perfect posture. They were good, rehearsed, safe. The Crown Prince listened closely. He asked smart, precise questions. He nodded thoughtfully. He offered the usual diplomatic phrases. "We'll consider it. Let's revisit this." Very promising. It was business, not personal. Professional, yes, but flat, predictable, cold. Then came lunch. The grand hall shifted into social mode. Small clusters of delegates sipping espresso and trading LinkedIn handles. Saudi officials floated through the room, warm but distant, making sure everything stayed smooth, elegant, controlled. And then, almost unnoticed at first, Ibrahim Traoré walked in. He didn't make an entrance, he didn't need to, but the energy changed the moment he appeared. At just 35, he was younger than most of the executives in the room, but there was something about him, a calm, a weight, a quiet authority that made people pause. And unlike every other leader there, he wasn't dressed for Wall Street. No tailored Armani, no silk tie. He wore his country's military uniform, simple, worn, and unmistakably real. It wasn't a costume, it was a statement, not about fashion, about identity, about being unapologetically himself. No matter the room, the fabric wasn't expensive, the fit wasn't flawless, but he wore it like armor, like pride, and without saying a word, he made something very clear. He didn't come to blend in. Conversations softened, heads turned, no grand gestures, no name-dropping. He didn't hustle across the room handing out business cards. He stood back, watched, waited, like a man who knew something everyone else didn't. And he did. His name sat at the very bottom of the day's speaker list, a time slot most attendees would treat as background noise. Half the room would be thinking about their dinner reservations or boarding passes. They thought the show was over, but Ibrahim Traoré was just getting started. The Crown Prince had been sitting through pitch after pitch for hours. His face remained polite, composed, but anyone watching closely could see it. His focus was fading. Even the most powerful man in the room was growing tired. A few delegates were already sneaking glances at their phones. Some whispered about leaving early, eyeing the clock, and thinking ahead to their flights. Then the moderator took the mic and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso." The applause was polite, at best, a scattered clap here and there. No real excitement. You could feel it in the room. This was just a formality, a gesture of inclusion. The kind of slot reserved to tick a box, not to make headlines. Even the Crown Prince leaned back in his chair, visibly settling in for what he likely assumed would be another routine address, a nice speech, nothing more. Then Traoré stepped onto the stage. No laptop, no flashy PowerPoint, no giant deck of talking points, just him, alone, standing at the podium in his military uniform, not speaking yet, just looking, making eye contact, slowly scanning the room. Silent. Long enough for the silence to get awkward. Long enough for the audience to shift in their seats, unsure of what was happening. And then, in a voice that didn't need a microphone, he spoke. Calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. "Your Royal Highness," he began, "distinguished delegates, I want to ask you a question." He paused. The room began to refocus. "When you close your eyes, And picture the future. What do you see? Now people were paying attention. No thank you for the invite. No tribute to Saudi hospitality. No warm-up stats about Burkina Faso. Just a direct, disarming question. Do you see taller skyscrapers? Faster computers? Smarter machines? He asked. Or do you see people standing taller, walking prouder, dreaming bigger? There was a shift in the room. You could feel it. Even Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman raised an eyebrow, just slightly, but it said everything. This wasn't your average investment pitch. Then Traoré did something unusual. He stepped away from the podium. He moved closer to the audience, like a professor, stepping down from the lectern to have a real conversation. For the past 6 hours, he said, I've listened to brilliant minds talk about market reach, profit margins, return on investment, all important, no doubt. But there's been almost no talk about the one resource that truly creates wealth, human potential. He let it hang. The room was still. Then he turned to the Crown Prince directly. Your Highness, your kingdom has invested wisely across the world. Silicon Valley, European industry, Asian tech giants. You've partnered with nations that already have wealth, infrastructure, stability. And then came the line no one was expecting. But may I ask, when was the last time you invested in raw human hunger? It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Dropped right in the middle of the world's most powerful room. A few delegates exchanged glances. This didn't feel like a pitch anymore. It was starting to sound more like a TED Talk. Or maybe a wake-up call. I come from a place most of you have probably never heard of. Traoré continued, Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. He wasn't reading from notes. He didn't need them. Every word felt lived in. We don't have oil like some of our neighbors, he said. No diamond mines, no coastline, no massive ports or shipping hubs. He paused, and then added almost defiantly, but what we do have is something this world is running out of. People who still believe the impossible is worth trying. There was a quiet rustle as he reached into his jacket. He pulled out something small and worn. A photograph. The front row leaned in instinctively. He held it up. This picture was taken 3 months ago. In a village called Garango, he said. The boy in this photo, his name is Musa. He's 10 years old. Until recently, he'd never seen electric light. Now the room was silent, like pin drop, silent. His village had no grid, no power lines, no generators. When the sun went down, the day was over. That was it. Darkness. Traoré's voice was still calm, but now, there was something deeper underneath, like a quiet fire. But 3 months ago, we installed our first community solar panel in Garango. Not with charity, not with World Bank loans, but with money we raised ourselves, by fixing how we manage our farms and clean up our mining industry. He looked around the room. Everyone was listening now. Even the Crown Prince had stopped scrolling his tablet. So what happened? When Musa's home lit up for the first time, he let the question breathe. No one moved. He didn't throw a party. He didn't scream with joy. He turned to his father and said, Now, we can study after dark. Now, we can build something. Traoré paused. Let that line sink in. 10 years old, he said softly. And his first instinct wasn't celebration. It was creation. Traoré began pacing the stage, slowly, deliberately. His eyes scanned the room, locking eyes with faces that had just an hour earlier written him off. That photo of Musa, he said, voice steady, that's what I came here to talk about. He paused. Not charity, not foreign aid, not development, assistance. I came to talk about partnership, real partnership, between nations that have capital and nations that have hunger. Hunger to grow, hunger to create. Now he stopped, right in front of the Crown Prince's table. Your Highness, he said, eyes fixed on the man who could change the future with a single investment. You've spoken beautifully about moving Saudi Arabia beyond oil, into tech, tourism, green energy, entertainment, all brilliant moves. But if I may, the room tensed. What if your greatest opportunity isn't replacing oil with technology, but replacing transactions with transformation? A ripple moved through the hall. You could see the discomfort on some faces. Traoré had just crossed a line most leaders tiptoe around. No one spoke this directly to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, especially not a president from a country whose GDP was smaller than what Saudi Arabia spent on a single megaproject. But Traoré wasn't backing down. His voice grew more sure, more magnetic. Africa isn't here asking for handouts, he said. We're here offering opportunity. 1 billion people across 54 nations, most of them under 25. The youngest, most energetic population on Earth. We have minerals, we have fertile land, we have sun and wind, and rivers full of renewable energy. But more than that, we have something you can't put on a spreadsheet. We have momentum, and we're still writing our story. Then, for the first time, he pulled out a piece of tech, a simple tablet. He tapped the screen, and behind him, the big monitors lit up with a clean, striking map of Africa, lines traced across the continent, west to east, like veins in a living body. This, he said, is the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor. The audience leaned in. Roads, rail lines, power grids, internet cables, 8,000 kilometers connecting Dakar to Djibouti. 12 nations, one vision. Not designed by foreign consultants in London or Paris, designed by us, African engineers, planners, economists. The energy in the room had shifted. Delegates were no longer distracted. Phones went face down. Pens came out. Eyes locked in. The price tag, he said, with a subtle smile, $800 million, less than what this kingdom spends on one luxury resort. A pause, but the impact, that's something no resort can buy. Imagine this, West Africa's farms, feeding East Africa's factories. Solar power harvested in the Sahara, lighting up the night from Senegal to Sudan. That's not just development. That's destiny. Now picture this, Traoré said, turning slightly, letting his voice guide the room's imagination. High-speed internet linking African universities directly to global research hubs. Students in Burkina Faso collaborating in real time with scientists in Tokyo, Berlin, or Boston. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was now fully engaged, leaning forward, arms resting on the table, eyes locked in. This wasn't just another pitch. Something was happening. But let me tell you why this matters to you, Your Highness. Traoré said, stepping closer again. This isn't just about Africa's growth. This is a chance for Saudi Arabia to become the bridge the world didn't know it needed. He gestured toward the map on screen again. Every ton of goods moving along this new corridor could pass through Saudi ports. Every watt of clean energy powering this network could use Saudi solar tech. Every connection, from Cairo to Cape Town, could be run on Saudi-built infrastructure. With a tap, the screen shifted to trade forecasts and economic growth charts. Real numbers, tangible possibilities. Even our most conservative projections show this corridor increasing Saudi-African trade by over 400% in the next 10 years. He paused, but beyond the numbers, it positions Saudi Arabia as something far bigger than a regional heavyweight. It makes you a global connector, a country that helped tie Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas together in a single, functioning network. The tone shifted again. As Traoré moved into the heart of his message, the screen showed models and rollouts, timelines, and investment paths. But he never let it feel like a spreadsheet pitch. He kept bringing it back to something deeper. Your Highness, he said, his voice clear and sincere, every great empire in history, every lasting legacy, wasn't defined by what it owned. It was defined I wanted built. The Egyptian